Ante Bikic
Yes.
and Anne
There you
Cooper. Welcome to the Map It Forward podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you both here. This conversation happened as a really great coincidence from our Roasters Mastermind group. And we happened to be having a discussion with you, Ante, and Anne and I were so incredibly impressed to have somebody sitting in front of us having a really open-minded discussion about roasting and someone who knew what they were talking about. We were like, could we do this on the podcast, please?
Yeah, definitely.
And so here we are. So welcome to both of you. So we're going to start by making sure everyone knows who both of you are, and then we're going to ramp into a conversation. So Ante, why don't you tell everyone who you are, since you've not been on the podcast before?
So my name is Ante Bikic, and I'm a roaster at Amokka Roaster in Denmark, and I am a current Danish coffee roasting champion. And then, I've been in the coffee industry for like probably around 10 years with work of events, volunteering, and all sorts of stuff.
Where were you before Denmark?
I'm originally from Croatia, so roasted in Croatia, then Ireland, some roasting as well, barista, and now here.
Total underachiever, right?
Sort of.
We will teach you about Australian sarcasm at some point. And the lovely Anne Cooper, welcome.
Thank you.
Remind
Great to be
everyone
back.
who you are.
Yeah, great to be back on again. I guess, long story short, I've been in the coffee industry about 27 years.
Ouch.
I started as a barista. I was the typical, uni student working in a cafe to make ends meet, and then ended up really loving coffee, and then went through that whole journey working as a barista, and then did a lot of training, competing, and then got into roasting, and then ended up working in New York for a while, and then came back to Australia, and did a bit more roasting, production roasting with some other roasters here, and then wanted to start tapping back into training. And so for the last 5 years, I've been working for myself as Equilibrium Master Roasters. That's my consulting and training company, where I would do my roasting course. Used to be monthly, but now it's quite regularly, or sort of, as demand is there. And then when I'm not doing that, I'm very spoilt, and I get to, move around and work one-on-one with roasters in their roastery. So definitely over the last 5 years, I've had the chance to use a gazillion different machines and be in all sorts of different roasting situations, and now have the honor of being, working with you with the roasting mastermind classes, and having someone like Ante come into the class is just kind of like, you're here because why? Like,
it's such a treat for all of us.
It's a treat and honor, but it's just like, it's always really refreshing to have someone like Ante come into the group and reinforce that whole, no matter how long we're in the industry for, there's always something to learn, and it's great just to bounce off and chat with other people. And so thank you for, for setting up that format, that platform for us as roasters, to get together and take advantage of that, which is just phenomenal.
It's my absolute privilege to do that. And we're like, of all the roasters that we could choose in the world to be trainers, you're the only one that ever comes up in my mind to do this. And particularly because the way that I like to approach education is all about empowering people to make their own decisions and understand why they should be making decisions like that. And then someone like you, Ante, pops up in the group, in the mastermind group. And a lot of the time in that session that we had, the most recent one, I'm like, I don't understand why he's here. Like but then you say something so beautiful that helps me understand why you're here. It's because you never finish learning. You never finish learning. And I'm like, that's why you and Anne are so perfectly matched as student and teacher, because you're each other's student and you're each other's teacher. It's really beautiful to watch. And I'm sitting there like in awe, watching the two of you exchange these conversations that you're having. And you're so open as a roaster to learning from everybody about everything. And it really does, to me, it brings back, I'm going to say something controversial right now. It brings me, what's the word? It restores my faith in competition that someone like you is the champion. Because typically what you have with these competitions is that this is the controversial bit. Historically, the winners of these competitions were people who perhaps didn't have the kind of open-mindedness that you bring to roasting. And so there was a lot of privilege that seemed to be involved in people who were winning competitions, not just in roasting, across the board. Whether it be that you had access to coffees that most people didn't have access to, or you had, more money to spend on coaching, or all this kind of stuff. You're somebody who I think that, provided people have the mindset that they can attribute to being like you, you really are the kind of role model that I hope people aspire to be like as a professional, not just as a champion. Does that make sense, Anne?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because I think as we sort of like touch on in the mastermind groups, the whole decision-making process is something that I see a lot in everyone at all levels, whether they're complete beginners or, really experienced. And I think I was just really genuinely astounded at just how clear Ante was, when talking about, his profiles and knowing how to, stand behind and be very definitive and decisive about why. And so, yeah, I think it was just, really, really, really awesome.
So, Ante, how did you decide that you wanted to get into roasting?
A long time ago, while I was still in Croatia, I've saved enough money to go to Proof Rock for a barista training, Proof Rock in London. And then I found a cheap second-hand Turkish roaster, and I paid 500 euros for it.
So and you put it back in your carry-on luggage, and then you took it back, right?
No, I found it actually in Croatia, so that Proof Rock training got kind of set aside, and I started roasting, and that's how it started. And from there on, it just kind of small improvements.
And how do you approach your first roast? Like I'm sure by that point you're like, all right, we're going to figure it out now. How do you
something
start
like
about that? Yeah, right.
You Google it, basically. That's how I started.
Wow.
So start temperature 200 degrees. Seems all right. Let's start with that. And stuff like
and
that.
let's hope we don't burn it all down.
Aiming for 8 minutes and things like that. And then when you start cupping, you just it's the first month of roasting that was just pure disastrous.
What happened?
I mean, there is pretty much nowhere to ask. So you bought a roaster, you bought a bag of coffee, you dumped it in, and it tastes horrible. It tastes of a coffee, but it's like washed out, empty, no flavors, no sweetness, no nothing. It's just, you can guess that it's a coffee. I mean, there's no feedback. There is no.
You can guess that it's a coffee.
And I guess, do you feel like, I just kind of thought then, because it really reminds me of that whole starting process of knowing what to believe, like when you're like trying to learn, and also, going through the motions of, how do I know I'm right? How do I know that what I'm tasting is right? How do I connect, the tasting to the roasting, all that kind of stuff. And I think definitely in terms of, maybe, you agree or not agree, but I would only say in the last 5, maybe 10 years, there's been a lot more better understanding and clarity on how to communicate that connection. But I still see that a lot with beginner roasters is them being terrified about standing in front of a roaster for the first time and not knowing how to start and what to believe, and then how to connect that through to the tasting. And I think as Ante kind of went, talking about the tasting, is that always reminding ourselves we're in the business of creating something to be tasted. And I think, as roasters, we really get caught up in the whole, oh, but we've got to buy this equipment because the equipment's going to do it for us, but the equipment can only do what we tell it to do. So then it's like, well, how do I learn how to tell the machine what to do? And how do I know that it's the right thing to tell the machine what to do, all that kind of stuff. So I think, you know, I guess like, Ante, how long do you think you would say it would have taken you to really get that clarity, that aha moment when you just went, oh, so I know my machine, I know the green, and I know the flavors. So regardless on whether I'm on an IMF or a Probat or a crazy Turkish machine, you know, how do I, you know, you kind of get an idea about how to, you know, cook and manipulate the flavors. Like, how long do you reckon it took you to kind of have that clarity?
It took me to be like confident so that I can, on a different types of roasters, say that this is what influenced the flavor. It took me like 5 years, I would say, at least.
Yeah, wow.
I mean,
Yep.
That's extraordinary.
I would say that I was, for a first year of roasting, I was at best deeply unhappy with how my coffee tasted. But there is no way
You
of
need a
knowing.
T-shirt that says that. At best, I was
I'm
deeply unhappy.
Deeply unhappy.
I think the biggest mistake I've made when I've started roasting is I've started roasting light.
What do you mean by that? Age-wise?
When I started roasting, I was roasting light, and that was
Oh,
the
light.
biggest
I
light,
thought you said late.
Like me too. I was like, what?
I'm like, but you can't be that old. What do you mean? You can't carry the bags? What's going on here?
And the reason being is because if you roast it super light, it's gonna be undrinkable if you mess it up. If you roast it medium or more developed, it's still okay. It's maybe not the best cup, but it's still something that people can connect to. It's familiar and stuff like that. And then me trying to chase it around on a lighter end, that was just.
But also for you too, and something that I experienced in the US, the whole cultural palette. I mean, you've had the great, you know, situation where you've worked in different countries and kind of dealt with different demographics and customers and expectations, and of course, roast level. So you've definitely had a good chance to, you know, to see, you know, the whole range for sure. Would you say there's a clearer definition between, you know, some of the countries you worked in, or some like a really distinct, is there a distinction? Yeah,
maybe Croatia is a bit more classical, like towards Italian style, but Ireland and Denmark, Denmark is more progressive, more kind of on the lighter side, but still there are like there is an audience for every roast, I would say.
In Denmark,
here is we roast from light to a dark. I work for a company that's also making a super automatic espresso machines, so we have like a full range, and that's how I approach my roast today. I'm roasting for how that coffee is going to be used in the end, not for a specific. So I roast for like super light to almost a second crack, and that I think made me a better roaster, trying to get a hold of like all spectrum of roasting.
Yep.
Can I ask a stupid question? You mentioned that you work for a company that makes super automatic espresso machines.
Yep.
I'm going to ask this at the risk of sounding like a moron, but that's okay. When you roast coffee for super automatic machines, do you have to take into account that they're a super automatic machine, or do you just roast for a particular drinking profile?
I was never a big fan of espresso and filter roasts, because you can make a filter roast taste good on espresso, but you have to change your approach of brewing. And how we, because if you buy our machines, you're gonna, in 99% of the cases, you're gonna be using our coffee, so we can control the whole experience. So if you buy a coffee, then we recommend the brew settings for you, and it's easy to adjust because those machines are behaving all of pretty much the same. So we just we recommend different brewing techniques for different coffees ratios, and that's how we approached. So we have coffees that are like 5 degrees higher than a first crack and only a minute of development time. But then again, those are mostly because we have a machine that has 2 grinders, one for espresso, one for a filter, black coffees. So that's mostly gonna go for a black coffees, or if you want it for espresso, it's gonna be like 1:4 ratio. So you sacrifice a lot of body and stuff for a flavor.
Yeah.
And we can control that quite easily, because how you control it, it's through the app on your phone or on tablet or whatever. So it's easy to adjust. What's
the name of the machines?
Brewer.
Brewer.
You have it in Australia. So.
Okay. I'm gonna go look for one. I didn't know that we have them here. Who uses them here? Is it mostly hotels and?
Yeah, we mostly deal with hotels or bigger offices and stuff like that. So bigger clients.
Okay. And that's why if they're using your machines, they're more likely to use your coffee, because it's the whole kind of solution that you provide them with. That's fantastic. That kind of means that at the roasting level, you're doing all the QC, you're cupping everything, you're using it on your machine so that you know exactly how it's going to taste. It's totally dialed into what that can do, and it should behave the way that you need it to behave, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to troubleshoot. So we have if you're unhappy how it tastes, then we can even I from here can guide you easily to get something that's okay, at least.
Because I guess like my roasting brain's kind of like floating around with the two, you know, kind of like roast levels. Because I know here in Australia, for any companies that do, you know, deal with, you know, selling the super automatic machine, there's kind of that well-known theory that we need to use really dark coffee, you know, for those machines to combat the low, you know, the different pump pressure, you know, the different, you know, settings, brew ratio, all that kind of stuff. Do you feel comfortable talking about your profile approach? Because I caught it, but maybe somebody else, you know, the others didn't catch it, in people listening, in the sense of the difference between your light and dark, where, you know, and I know you can do a really cracking light roast and still have solubility in that machine. But you also mentioned for the darker roast, you might sacrifice some of the body, you know, for the sake of the end flavor. And because we know the energy required to get to that level of that depth of, you know, end roast color. From a roasting perspective, and this is something I'm super passionate about with helping roasters better understand, is that connection between sensory and the data on the screen. And when we were, and I think the thing that got like, well, myself in particular, and Lee as well, in terms of when we were chatting to you, when you were talking, you were showing us your profiles and, you know, showing us the differences in the timing in the phases in your cooking strategy, because I was just excited because I could look at it and I could taste your profile. So I knew exactly what your coffee was going to taste like based on how you'd mapped out your strategy. So do you feel comfortable talking about your cooking strategy between the light and the dark approach? Just for the roasters out there, and how we use that in, you know, obviously whether it be, I guess, Cropster and Artisan, because they are both mapping out the phases in terms of times and all that kind of stuff. And I'm super passionate about roasters really understanding the timing of their cooking strategy, as well as, of course, knowing how to make that happen on, you know, their specific machine and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, whatever you feel comfortable talking about between the light and the dark approach on your cooking strategy.
Open one roast, so I'm not going completely blind. All right, so for first thing is I'm roasting on a 60 kilo IMF hot air roaster, and then we have 2 batch sizes. One is a 60 kilo full capacity, and then for a lighter roast we use 40 kilos. The reason is I think it's easier to achieve clarity of flavors in a smaller batch and a slightly faster roast. It just works better. That's the first thing we do when we roast light. We use a lower batch size.
Yep.
Then in terms of starting temperature, it's always going to be 190 when we load the green beans, because we run it on a full automatic cycle, and that's why we keep it constant, and then it's always the same.
Yep. And just for roasters out there, in terms of, I guess we should also frame up the system for them in terms of the type of probe and the position of the probe on the IMF.
So we're using 3 millimeters probes, and we updated that. So I think the IMF is by default 6 millimeters. Or maybe ours is pretty old, so maybe they've changed that by now, but I don't know. And it's located like around 7-8 o'clock, I think. You know, like kind of
7-8 o'clock. Yep.
yeah.
Yep. But
I would guess
lower in the door.
Lower,
and
yeah,
it's,
lower
and
in the
it's
door. So it's always in a
clockwise.
pile of
Yep.
in a
Yep.
pile of the beans. So I would say pretty standard stuff, maybe a slightly faster probe. First crack is around 200 degrees. We just set it by default that Cropster marks it at 200 degrees. That's it. We don't change it for a specific coffee. It's mostly so we track when it's gonna metrics we're keeping track of is turning point, when it's gonna happen. So time wise, not that much of temperature. And then what we are looking for a peak rate of rise. We always want it around 15 degrees in a 30
seconds. Yep.
Yeah. And then we wanna it depends on the style of roast. We wanna reach 150 degrees that we call a color change. It's maybe a bit too soon for a color change, but we just settle for a 150 degrees. That's the metric we're aiming for. For a lighter roast, it's gonna be around 4.5 minutes, and for a darker roast, it's gonna be between 5.5 to 6 minutes.
Okay.
And then first crack we mark it at 200 degrees. And the end temperature we roast from like 205 to 220 from light to dark.
And what time is first crack generally happening on? Is there a difference between your light and your dark?
Yeah, it's gonna be anywhere between 8 to 11 minutes. Depends on the roast.
Yep. So on the lighter roast, would that be happening more at the 8 minute? Oh, pardon me. The earlier time. Yeah,
we have the fastest first crack is around 8 minutes, but then development time on the coffee, that's a Brazilian coffee, is 2 minutes.
Yep.
So we ended up at around 10 minutes, and it's 280 degrees, slightly higher, slightly longer, but still faster roast.
Yep. And then your darker roasts, they have a slightly shorter midsection, so you can then go slightly longer to
towards
your
the end. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. And I think just that thought process in, really being connected with that as roasters is the clarity on that and the distinction on that. And then I think the thing that's wonderful with your profiles, Ante, is that you're so very definitive. You know how they taste. Like you talk about, your light profiles, your dark profiles, you know how you got there, and that's super important. And that's the kind of thing that's really great for roasters to really go through that process of getting to that stage where you know your machine, you know your batch sizes, and you know the endpoint, but you know the impact of a particular stage and timing, with what you're trying to do. Yeah,
I think it comes down a lot to simplifying things.
Yes, that's right. That did come up in. Yeah, I remember that last time. Yep. I agreed.
Successful roast of even a 15 kilo in a 60 kilo roaster.
Yep.
That's totally doable, but it's not something I would do on a day-to-day basis. It's a nightmare to manage with
But like you said, it's doable. Yeah.
It's doable, but it's not something you would want to do. I can easily switch between a 60 and a 40 kilo roast.
Yep.
It's gonna take me maybe because IMF doesn't retain a lot of heat, so it's easy to cool it down or to change between the different profiles and stuff like that.
Yep.
So we just, everything we thought is unnecessary or it's not clear, the impact of the things we do is not clear, we just move it away.
So is there anything in particular, when you, because I'm the same, I'm a really big fan of keeping things really clear and simple. Is there anything in particular that you've kind of identified in your roasting, that things that we kind of need to let go of, and the things that you like to focus on to keep things nice and simple?
I think between batch protocol is it's important, but it's too complicated how most people do it.
Yep.
For instance, I'm now also preparing for a world championship, so I'm roasting on a Gießen and on a IMF. And what I do in between batches is, so I don't have a lot of heat already in the roaster because I'm dropping it pretty much at the same temperature that I'm going to load the next batch. I've just loaded immediately, pretty much. I'll keep the door open for 1 minute, close it. When temperature reaches, I drop the coffee. The reason why I do that is because I've at the beginning of a roast, I'm gradually increasing the energy. So I have these steps when I'm adding the energy until I peak. I reach my desired rate of rise.
Yep. And this is on the Gießen.
on a Gießen, but I have the same
Yes.
approach on an IMF. It's it's slightly less steps and a different approach, but the same idea behind it. It allows much faster back-to-back roasting, more efficiency, and
and do you think that also comes down to also reinforcing for us as roasters, you know, having that good clarity on the knowledge on our equipment in terms of the type of burner we've got, the type of drum we have, like what you pointed out in terms of heat retention. I think, you know, that technique that you've got on the Gießen, hot tip for anybody doing roasters comp, you know, being a hot little roaster, you know, you found a really awesome technique to manage that, you know, whether it be so you've got a solid in between batch protocol, but it allows you to be consistent then, you know, moving through. And you'll be no doubt doing smaller batches too on the Gießen.
I mean, with this approach, you need to have a lot of power so you can carry out the roast, because you're not relying on energy that's stored in the drum. IMF is pretty powerful, and on a Gießen, I'm doing a 3 kilo in a 6 kilo roaster, so I still have plenty of power to carry out the roast. But with this approach, I think it's easier to control your curve, because you're not relying on energy that's been stored in the drum, so you can like take off in a way you don't want it.
And I think along with that as well, you're also thinking about the cooking strategy. So you're thinking about managing the roaster. Yes, you're managing the data and the curve on the screen, but your end game is also the strategy of how you cook the coffee, because you know having a couple of different thought processes, you know, you've got a sweet profile or you've got a more acidic or more complex profile. So I think, again, reinforcing, you know, to roasters out there in terms of, knowing your equipment, knowing your flavors, knowing your green, but, you know, really knowing your way through those stages. And I think I can't shout it out loud enough in terms of, you know, the whole roasting is cooking. Coffee does change color. It does physically, you know, change. And we need that connection. You know, when do we look at the coffee and the sensory to help us make a decision with our data? Like, they need each other.
Can I ask,
I don't know,
why is that controversial? Like, it seems to be,
I guess,
a controversial thing in our industry, right? But as someone who's not a roaster, I'm like, I don't get it, because it starts green, turns yellow, and then goes brown. Why is this such a controversial thing?
Because it doesn't go for green to yellow in a second.
So
a
there's shades of yellow.
When is yellow enough? So you can call it yellow.
And I get the subject. There's a bit of subjectivity in the terms of assessment, because you've got, you know, different origins, different screen sizes, different varieties, and you've got process thrown in. They've got all these things that are influencing the way certain beans change. The most consistent thing you can do is find your consistent way of calling each of those events, you know, in terms of color change and cracking. And so then you can always stay on track, you know, with, you know, then, you know, what you're doing with your specific setup. But also too, like, it just breaks my heart that, you know, the sensory gets a poor old kick in the guts as being, you know, old school. Like, it's an old school technique to, you know, to look at the color change, to smell, all that kind of stuff. But it's kind of like, I'll often, you know, say to people though, but when your computer decides to, you know, shut down or freeze, how are you going to, and you're mid roast, how are you going to finish your roast? Well, you're going to pick up a timer and you're going to start looking at the coffee, because you need to check where is the coffee at. So you kind of, you know, generally know how to then, you know your steps. Well, you should know your steps, you know, and you can then drive yourself out for the rest of the roast. So it's kind of like, well, when everything, you know, when your Wi-Fi signal drops out and everything that's running that machine decides to stop, you're just like, well, you can, you know, I guess depending on the system, depends is probably the biggest word in the industry, isn't it? In terms of you could drive yourself out, you know, manually to an extent and still, you know, produce a good quality coffee. So
and I guess that's the difference.
Anyway, that's my rant. What do you think, Ante?
That's why I'm still roasting, because I'm still not feeling comfortable enough, so I can say, if you do this is going to be your outcome.
Right.
And
I mean, that's the difference, right? Between what we term as someone who's good versus someone who's exceptional at their job. They're able to pivot when everything's going right, it's really easy to be good at something. If it goes right all the time, it's really easy to be good at something. But the people who are exceptional at their jobs are the ones who know how to react when everything goes wrong, and they can still end up with a great outcome. That's what makes the difference between someone who's good and great, in my opinion. And that's what I've said. Like, I mean, I was at the beginning of my career an intuitive barista, but despite the fact that scales and timers existed, I'm not that old. They did exist back then. We just didn't think to use
We
them.
just weren't using them. No.
So we were smelling, we were, sighting our pores, we were doing all that kind of stuff. But now, if like with all the technology that we've got available to us, once it craps itself and, your scales run out of batteries and you don't have any and all that kind of stuff happens, you rely on your ability to be able to intuit what's happening.
Yeah, and because the thing that came to mind on that whole barista side of things, and dare I say, without being I don't know, yelled at, but like the art of tasting, I think with baristas has been lost a little bit in terms of dialing in. Like if the numbers don't work, I've seen kilos get, just blown through when they're just trying to dial in, as opposed to just kind of tasting. And I think it kind of brings up the point, like with roasting, with maybe you agree, Ante, in terms of having range in your data points. Like if you make things too perfect, you're just going to hurt yourself with stress. It's just going to make things really unnecessarily stressful. And I think it's the same with baristas, I think, and dialing in. You've got to have a range to work with. Sorry, Lee, I jumped in.
No. Go ahead. I'm loving this.
I'm gonna first touch on a brewing. So recently I've tried to make an AeroPress without the scales. I don't remember
How did that go?
Were you okay? Were you okay? Did you have to have a little lie down afterwards?
But yeah, that's
look at him, he's rubbing his forehead. And
I'm still nervous about that brew.
He's still trying to recover from it.
Poor old AeroPress has been getting a bloody dig around again, but anyway.
Yeah. I've never been a fan, but I know, I understand that people are.
So did you at least weigh the coffee going in, or did you just scoop it in
no scales,
to the line? You just followed the line where they said fill it to this number and just do it.
I've used Comandante, so I know on that glass jar how much is approximately 15 grams. So
okay.
I've eyeballed it kind of. This looks like 15 grams. Let's go with this.
Let's hope that did you have to squint a little bit or wink?
Yeah. You have to.
But aren't like the Uber original instructions, like just scoop the coffee to the certain number, and then you just fill the water to a number.
Didn't they used to give you a spoon with it too, like a scoop?
I'm pretty sure they did. And the stirrer. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of roasting, I think it's important to have a range, because now I'm in the middle of these preparations for a world championship, and I don't know which coffees are we gonna get. And so if I focus on specific metrics, I'm gonna fail. But it's like what did for the nationals here. All of my decisions were made in advance. Mm-hmm. So if my ROR is not peaking at 2.5 minutes, use more energy. Use additional step, increase it. If it's at 150 degrees, if ROR is higher than this, then do this. So I was staying there and just going through my notes and adjusting it.
Yep.
Because I've seen that coffee for the first time. I did a sample roast. That's the best I can do. Mm-hmm. If I start overthinking it, it's I know it's gonna go bad.
Exactly, and I even think too, like in especially in production roasting as well. And again, it's not to sound, I often have to say to people that are really new to the industry, and we're talking about production parameters, and you've got to have at least a plus or minus of X amount of degrees from your target. So if something does go a little bit over or a little bit under, you've got an idea about, well, where do you draw the line? And then you sort of have that discussion about, well, what is the customer going to notice? Like, where's the point where they are going to really, notice that it's, a degree under, or you went 15 seconds too long or something like that. So I think it's really important to sort of that, you know, have that range and always back yourself up with the, you know, I've always got like a chart of parameters to refer to in terms of definition for the different roast levels. And, you know, you've got a range for your weight loss, you know, your target time and temperature, your roast color, your end color, all that kind of stuff. So I find it really fascinating when I hear crazy stories of roasters that they'll do a color measurement when their roast comes out and they'll genuinely discard it if it's not exact. And it's like, that's really, yeah, I'm not sure if you've heard, it was actually some European roasters I heard maybe were being really strict.
She almost sung that.
With their measurements. I could be wrong, but look, you know, perfection to a point is
admirable.
How do we say this? It's good, but I think, you know, maybe just because I've definitely been that roaster, you get, you know, you make yourself physically ill with worry, and then you come back the next day and it actually is passable. Like it actually does taste, you know, okay. And I think it's just really important though, do you feel like, Ante, when you were learning, did you feel you had the support and knowledge to know the range, you know, with your targets, and you did knowing when to really worry and just go, yeah, no, that's not okay, or you know what, you know, we can pass this out, but just make a note that, you know, it's on record as, you know, not being, you know, ideal kind of thing?
I would probably say that for the first 3 years, I was every single roast made me nervous when it was finished. When I was about to. The reason is of like you said, all of those expectations that you can read online and that kind of builds up. We created this idea how it should look. When you go online, Google roasting stuff, there is the way how it looks, what it should be done, what should be followed, and if you're gonna aim for that, you're not gonna have a good time.
No.
In the terms of numbers, how we do it here. So when we 60 kilo batch, plus minus 300 grams is fine. IMF is dropping coffee automatically out, so that means temperature is always going to be on point, but it can be like up to a 15. On a daily basis, profiles are going to be close enough, 5 seconds, let's say. But from today and yesterday, it can be 15 seconds difference. Now it comes down to, I think, if you make espressos back to back, differences in brew from the same batch are going to be bigger than the differences between the batches when you cap them on a table. So it's just finding that window that you're willing to go with.
Correct.
I think if someone is going to be really strict, I think that's great. But then you cannot really scale that up. You're kind of limiting yourself to a fixed volume and then it's doable. And then as soon as you need to do more, it's not doable.
You burn out.
Yeah. So it's
and I think that's really important for roasters to hear, is, you know, from that experience, is like you said, there's all this, you know, do this, make sure it looks like this, you know, perfection, but the reality of what we're facing, you know, in our production room is, you know, understanding that range, understanding that, you know, what are the goals, and, you know, how do we know? Yeah.
I mean, like you said, what happens with the batches that have failed? That's pure waste. That has to go somewhere, and that's not something that the industry is looking about.
Well, they just chuck them in blenders, right?
I'm lucky enough that we have a testing facility for our machines. So even if I mess it up, it just goes next door.
You can send them through.
Stuff, so
that's fine. A really valid point. I haven't heard that for a really long time. What happens to the batches that are discarded?
I think the only what I've seen is I think Tim Vandelbo handles that really well.
Who?
Tim Vandelbo. Tim Vandelbo. Yeah, he has what he calls a test roast. There are probably if they tested something and stuff, and you can buy it cheap, and it's honest. It's a blend of different.
Oh, so they're actually like a clean skin, kind of like a.
It's a transparent bag with you don't know what's inside. Just as test roast, and you can buy it cheap. And that's the reality.
Awesome.
That those roasts that you're not happy with are gonna happen. And then what do you do with
them?
Oh
yes, yep, absolutely. Like I know when I was in the US, the flavoring room was always very busy when a roast went wrong. So we would send it to flavoring.
What's
but now here,
room?
You know how they code, it's got to be like ours had to be in the basement because it's so stinky. So when they coat the beans with the flavoring.
I thought it was a company name that, so you just sent them
Oh,
to
no,
a company
sorry.
called
No,
Flavoring Room. I'm
no,
like,
no,
I don't know them.
no. No, everyone,
You'd
like
add
it's
hazelnut syrup.
it's like, all that fun stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
So,
They would be
yeah.
busy.
Yeah. But yeah, that's really interesting, that whole thought
Yeah.
process in terms of communicating. So do you actually know, or they just call it test roast? Like you don't know that it was like kind of like.
I think it states on a web page that it's like it's a blend of a different roasts. So it could be one roast, it could be more roast. They don't specifically state it, but
it's just stuff that just didn't hit their targets for them, and they just didn't feel comfortable.
Because if you they have a pretty strict cupping protocol, like QC.
Yes.
So I guess that everything they're not happy with is going to be sold at a significantly lower price. I mean, it's still the same quality of the green beans, so it's still going to be tasty, but it's maybe not up to a standard to be called a Tim Wendelbo, which is, I think, is great.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that's a really interesting, because it brings up potentially brand protection, just flashing
I might
my
be
brain
wrong,
then.
but I think that's how it goes.
I'm due to call Tim, so I might have a chat with him and see if he wants to come and talk about it on the podcast.
Really interesting. So it doesn't get sold under the Tim Wendelbo brand.
It still is. You can buy it in their shop on their webpage. They even sold it during this Corona times on a webpage. I saw it once, I think.
Yeah, wow.
So, but it's not called like, let's say, Nacimiento or Finca Tamara. It's a test roast.
Yep, that's a really great way.
Same beans, but maybe we are not happy with, or didn't hit all of the metrics that we wanted from that.
Yep.
And when you look at the people starting, they buy a high quality greens, and then if you mess up a batch, and you will, that's a crazy expensive,
isn't it?
I mean, starting a roasting business and then going for this high end, like I don't know, high scoring green beans, nice stories, nice equipment, Instagram friendly.
On that point, so that straight away that kind of brings up a really interesting realization that maybe could be touchy to talk about, in terms of well, there's a couple of layers there, in the sense of, I think it's really important that you, at the point that you made, like when you're learning how to roast, and everyone's really all about, I have to use specialty coffee, I have to buy this level of coffee, all that kind of stuff, and not really truly understanding the base economics of their business and everything. So I think it's really important to have that mindset as you're learning, is to start really sensibly, in the sense of the kind of coffees that you're buying to start learning with, so you can then obviously work your way up into those more expensive coffees. But one thing I've been seeing a lot of, because I'm dealing with a lot of non-industry people wanting to get into roasting at the moment as a result of COVID. And everybody, I was actually reading somebody's marketing little blurb today, and I really spoke quite openly about them with this point, and they kept going on about specialty coffee. And I asked them the question, I said, well, think about some of your favorite roasters. Do they have the word specialty in their branding? And a lot of them don't. And whether they meant to do that, I think it's a really smart thing that they don't have it mentioned, because it gives them the the flexibility in terms of their offerings and what they can do. So I think it kind of really breaks my heart when you're seeing a lot of people focusing really hard on, they have to use specialty green and blah, 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 but then they're going to get to a point where their business just won't be sustainable enough to, to roll with that.
And we see it a lot in the mastermind groups. Even in the Roasters Mastermind group, I try to figure out what's the most asked question that we get in there. And I think the biggest concern, and I'd love to hear what both of you think about this, people want to maximize their return on a bag of coffee. They want to get to a dialed in profile as quickly as possible. And they want to waste as little of the coffee as possible in trying to get there. And it feels to me like the question that keeps coming up is, how do I dial in a new coffee? That seems to be something that keeps coming up again and again. And I think it's directly connected to what you were talking about, which is business viability. If you're using up a whole bag to dial in a coffee, and you've only bought one bag, or you're using a half of the bag, it's a real problem for the
You need to do
weight
more training with
process.
me. You need to give me a call.
Yeah. Or join the mastermind groups, get one-on-one coaching with that. But this is the kind of thing that we are,
Yeah.
it keeps coming up in the mastermind groups with roasters. How do you approach a new coffee, Ante?
I always, let's say when we roast it on Kava, we taste it and then we see how we want to take it from there.
Mhm.
And then let's say if it doesn't have much, it's just let's say 80 to 82 points, so it's clean, some sweetness, no really distinct flavors. That means it's gonna go to medium. And now we know that we're gonna take it up to let's say 12 minutes, and we want our first crack around 10 minutes. That means that I need to have it my ROR at crack has to be around 6-7 degrees for me to have a nice transition toward the end, or something that's not gonna fall apart on a cupping table and stuff like that. So we made our decision before roasting, and then we go for it.
Yep.
It's as simple as that.
You say simple
Agreed.
as that.
Well, because what I was going to say, because what I do very similar to what Ante's got, in the sense of we've got this. So the thing that is, and I think the thing that scares roasters is similarity, and they're going, surely, because the thing that will be the same is the profile. The profile is the cooking strategy, because that profile is what gives you an end point, an end flavor. So that has to be the unifying factor. And that is the green to yellow to first crack to finish. So in order to keep that similarity in check, you need to also understand the machine you're using. So, like, for example, I've got a machine in my roastery that has a stainless steel drum, and I have a machine in my roastery that has a double wall mild steel drum. So for me to do then the same coffee, the same profile on those two different machines, then the heat strategy, the way in which I'm manipulating the heat in order to keep the bean on track with that profile, of course, is going to be different, because I'm responding to batch size, as well as the materials in the drum and the style of heat transfer that I have. And I think it still blows my mind sometimes, when roasters still get a little bit confused, separating that whole, the profile is what has to stay the same. The heat strategy is what changes. So when you're roasting a Colombia versus a Brazil versus an Ethiopian, they can still have the same, profile, but they might need a slightly different heat adjustment to keep them to get them to go to yellow at the same time and temperature, and to get them to crack. Well, actually, cracking will be different because of the different, properties in terms of density and process. But even that, knowing, you can still, learn where that bean cracks, so you can then cook them to then still map out at the same time. And then you, of course, then work on your depth of, roast at the end. So it's the profile that is that really unifying underpinning factor. So yeah, I kind of use that base profile to start. I learn how the coffee reacts. I guess what Ante is looking at in terms of if peak rate of rise is slightly different, or rate of rise at color change in yellow is slightly different. That's because that bean is giving me feedback about how it's taking on, how I'm applying the heat. And so you've got a strategy about a certain rate at key points in the roast. And so it's up to us to then, it can be as easy as then, well, I just make sure I'm on a hotter heat, or I take away the heat and I just keep on, driving at the similar pace. And then you taste it, and then you give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and you work out what you like and don't like. And then you know which part of the profile to manipulate to then get the best out of that coffee. Sorry, another rant, but anyway.
No. I think I need to point something out for both of you here. The confidence that you're both speaking with, you're referring to as, it's as simple as that. But the confidence
It really is.
right. But the reason I think it's as simple as that, and you both exude confidence when you're talking about this, the amount of work that came into it over the years that you've been doing this and establishing a very clear and fundamental understanding. And Ante used the word earlier of like, keep it simple. it's like you've simplified the understanding and the fundamentals of what you're doing, removing all the noise, making it as not uncomplicated as possible, so that you're just basically sticking to a blueprint that you slightly move around to adjust to, changing conditions. We were talking in our roasters group of if the door's open and if the door's closed in your warehouse, you have to do things slightly differently. But other than that, you keep it simple and you try to uncomplicate it as much as possible. But that confidence comes from the fact that you both actually know what you're doing. You're not
But I
pretending
think,
to know what you're
but it's
doing.
also knowing, like, it's also like tasting and actually giving yourself as a roaster the opportunity
Yeah.
to interpret and understand the flavor. And that's what I loved about Ante's approach, and being so clear about, well, this is the sweet approach, this is the more complex, brighter approach. And again, that clarity. And I think that's why I just really connected so much with, Ante's approach, because I'm just like, yes, that's exactly what it's
It
all
should
about.
be that easy.
And yeah, and as Ante said as well, in terms of with the keep it simple, it's so you can enjoy it. It's so you can be creative and really follow the process, really well. But again, you've got to give yourself the opportunity to step back, and it's about kind of like interpreting it, like absorbing it, so you can interpret and then strip it down and break it down so it
Make
stays.
decisions.
Yeah.
I think that the hard part is when you're cupping, you have to disconnect yourself from what you like and be
Ooh,
objective.
True.
That's
Yes.
another
Let's say
t-shirt right there.
I'm roasting light to dark, and now I'm preparing for a World Coffee Roasting Championship,
Yeah.
and I'm pretty much roasting for a cupping table.
All right.
And now what I think is good is not relevant anymore. I am now roasting for a specific purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And now, how can I say I don't like it, but
potentially a
it's
cultural palette as well. Yeah.
so you have to be at a point to say this is good, although I don't like it. And that's hard to say to yourself, especially if you're an owner of a roastery and roasting. For me, it's maybe a bit easier because even if I don't like dark roasts, I'm just roasting them for a structure.
I was
Flavor
about to
components
ask
are
you, do you apply the same thing for your customers?
Yeah.
it's simplifying. Dark roast has to taste of all of those roasty flavors, but it has to have a structure. What I don't like about dark roast is when they fall apart on a cupping table. They have like that intensity, roasty bitterness.
They're
and
astringent and
body,
sour. Yep.
And we just, for dark roast, the aim is to battle that. It has to give a structure. So it has to have like nice body and those buttery feeling to it. And that's it. Because the flavor is going to be always the same pretty much.
Yep.
And
it's really fascinating, the whole the heart versus what you would like to do versus what's kind of required. Have you ever been in a situation or seen or heard of any companies where you've seen roasters just really go off track on a business, like on a brand, and kind of like go in a direction because they've read something that's the current trend, and they've tried to apply those techniques because that's what they think they should do, and whether they didn't get enough strong direction from their top management to help keep that in control? Have you seen any of that before?
Yes, but not as a, let's say, a serious level, maybe to a more medium level. And when I say that, those are the roasters that are still finding themselves. They look at the hype, and then they just follow it.
Yep.
Here in Denmark, you have a very, let's say, established roasteries like Coffee Collective, April Coffee, or Prolog. So they have a distinct style. So they're not gonna fall into that trap. And that's what I like. Even if when you go to those places, you know what you're gonna get. It's not like what you see most of these new roasteries. They go and then they say we're gonna roast the coffee for its best potential. What is the best potential of the coffee?
It's so subjective, though, isn't it?
Yes. When you deal with the taste, it's hard. That's why if you have a style, that's gonna determine how you're gonna source your green beans, how you're gonna roast it, and how you're gonna brew it in the end. And that's, I think, more important than being all over the place.
Yeah, and then I guess definitely those companies have really good clear direction from their top management down, and I guess where you are at the moment? Do you feel like you feel you've got that kind of structure in place in terms of you're really clear on the brand, the products, the end zone, so to speak, with the products?
Our main focus is going to be on experience. So we're focusing more on a whole experience. That's why when you scale things up, so let's say I have to find a lot of 20 tons of coffee that we're going to sell as a single. It's extremely difficult.
Whoa. Yeah.
Extremely difficult, and then maintaining all of that. So we don't follow those same trends. It's just not doable for us.
Yep.
We want it clean and sweet for these singles, and that's pretty much it. Light roast. Flavor wise, we don't focus that much on it because our audience is big and maybe not that interested into a coffee. They just want to say, is it good or not? That's what's important. So we just kind of keep all of those things simple.
And for anyone who's confused by what Ante means by big, Anne and I were treated to an understanding of how much green coffee he has to deal with. And whatever you think big is, I promise you it's not even close to what big actually is for the volume of coffee this gentleman has to actually roast.
Yeah,
it's
humongous.
So we are big for a specialty coffee, but we are small when you compare us to like a commodity roasteries.
Right, but you're not a commodity roaster. That's the point. Like, you roast specialty grade coffee. And
we mostly deal with the coffees that are going to score like low 80s, 82, 82, 3. Maybe something interesting is going to hit 84 sometimes.
Just really quickly on that point, I think that's a really interesting, kind of point in the sense of, so we've got this 80-point scale, with specialty. Technically, if it's been cup scored and assessed and given above 80 points, it's specialty. Technically then too, the expectation of the green should be a level of cleanliness as well. Can I poke the bear, I guess, just so to speak, and kind of ask, do you feel that's following through? Like, just because it's a low 80, like, shouldn't really mean, have you seen any impact? Like, has the green still been following through, with specialty expectations in terms of cleanliness and, 0 primary defects, no more than 5 full secondary defects, all that kind of stuff?
In 99% of the cases, that's correct. When you're dealing with lots, there are like, I don't know, a couple of containers. There's going to be a bag or a sample that you're going to pull with a primary defect. That's just
okay.
There is so many of the beans that it's not possible to avoid completely. But yes, that's. But then again, it comes to a price. Let's say that coffee is going to go score whatever it's going to score, and then you might be asked a question: do you want it a bit cheaper with a bit more defects?
Yeah, great. Okay. Yep, that's good. That's good to know, because
even if you get a sample, you're not lucky, they can resort it again, and then you can get it. It's going to change your price slightly, but
correct. That little snippet is, I think that's such an important thing in terms of like roasters understanding the green that they're buying, the green grading, the impact on the pricing, all of that just in that is, just phenomenal. Because I do believe there's been a bit of a disjoint, I think, over the years between green grading for specialty and the flow through to the cup score. And I think it's just, been lost a little bit because, as you know, like some commercial coffees can actually out-cup and out-taste a specialty coffee. They've just got more defects. And so it's really interesting. It's a really interesting time, I think, at the moment. And I'm think I heard some whispers maybe that the SCA cupping form or the 80 points form in general is getting a bit of a revision. And I had a chance to give some feedback about it. And one of the things I suggested, and it may or may not get taken on board, but I really think there needs to be a section on the cupping form that has the green grading score or result on the form as well. But I think for roasters, like dealing with the cup score, the green grading, and I guess, on that 1% instance, when you do get, a primary defect, sneaking through, what did you do? Was it just enough where you would just go, no, that's okay, it can slide through? Or did you renegotiate the price? Or was it prolific?
Whenever we are kind of not that busy here, I do a green grading, green analysis, stuff like that. And then if I even go across that, I'm just gonna send the mail. There is a primary defect, nothing serious. Maybe we should look. We're not gonna renegotiate price. We are at the volumes at which that's gonna happen. It's extremely hard to minimize it.
Yes.
We don't see a lot of those, but every now and then we came across one. And so it's a.
Yep. Do you?
It is what it is. I'm not gonna freak about it, and it's a reality of it.
Exactly. Do you feel the current grading format is really strict? Is potentially a bit too harsh on origin? Like our expectation in our first world SCA CQI roasting world versus what's actually going on at origin and for producers in terms of, because there is a distinct sometimes difference between their level of grading for a specialty versus what our expectations are as as roasters in our realm.
I don't think it's strict, but people don't understand how much work it goes into dealing with those problems, and then they don't want to pay for it.
Yes.
Those are just some rules. But if you want that coffee, then you have to pay for it.
Yes.
You cannot you cannot ask for less defects and pay the same price.
Yes.
That's not the same coffee anymore.
Exactly.
I'm just thinking of all the conversations that I've had with roasters of like, why can't they just do this better? I heard a roaster say that
you
once.
just pay more.
That was my response. They can
that's
do better if you want to pay for it.
Exactly. And they don't want to pay for it. And that's just, so thank you for driving that point home. Roasters really need to hear that experience and that thought process. So important. And that's what I love about talking to you, because you've just got this such grounded, like succinct experience and viewpoint about what you're doing with your role, as what you're doing with your, yes, it's production roasting for, whatever you're doing with your volume and everything, but just your whole experience and mindset is just phenomenal, and just, it's wonderful.
When it comes to green beans, like I said, it has to be clean, sweet flavors, not really important. And then, not important, secondary. And then we want a stable shelf life.
Yep.
I would say that's the most important thing for us. And
when you say stable shelf life, what's the shelf life you're looking at? Are you looking at just current crop? Are you looking at beyond the first?
It needs to be good enough for a year until the next crop arrives. That's the main goal. And then
what are the shipping times for you guys generally? How many days is it taking to get to you?
Honestly, I don't know. I'm not dealing with that. So So it's not. But what we do is we kind of when the harvest is happening, let's say in Brazil, then we make a plan for a shipping for an entire year, because we have a pretty big storage, but not big enough. So it's kind of we make a plan for a year and then we just stick to it.
I guess the great thing about countries like Brazil and Colombia in particular, with the longer seasons in terms of shipping, and where you've got your wash done first, then your natural, so you've got that extension in terms of with Brazil anyway, and obviously the different regions in Colombia and the range of time that they've got. But no, it's just interesting because down here in Australia it's always minimum 40 45 days, but lately I'll just add a couple of weeks to a month because of delays and things that will happen. And just in general, in terms, as we're hearing in terms of general movement from whether it be from the mills to the port, or from the farms through the whole process, because it's just taking a bit longer, all that kind of stuff. So, and then no doubt a major weather event will happen and something will hold the ship up even
Climate
longer.
shifting isn't real,
all that fun stuff.
Don't you know? It's not real.
I was going to ask about with the shelf life, I guess, so to speak, with the green. Are you doing water activity measurements on the coffee at all?
Not at all. What we do is we just cap it. And that's pretty much it. Like I said, that the level this coffee is at, still a specialty. It's still great coffee.
But
it's not as important. because we are dealing with big volumes with producers who have some experience to it.
Yes.
And then it's we just go with it, and that's it.
Yep. And I guess that's that's another one of those important things to mention, in terms of the industry, is that we're trusting experience, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're trusting the relationship, the whole cycle, from from the producer through to you getting it, knowing that it's at a point ready to to start moving through it. Yep.
I have a question about COVID. Have you found that COVID has influenced your supply chain and delivery of the coffee? Are we deep enough into COVID to know if that's going to be a problem this year yet?
I would say no, but we'll have to see. We didn't, how we source and how that coffee is delivered to us. Zero problems with it. It's just
That's
business
awesome.
as usual. But I guess we'll still have to see it, probably with this harvest that's going to happen this year and stuff.
Do you get any coffees from India?
No.
Okay. Yep. Because that's a supply chain that I think is going to be seriously affected next year, given what's happening with their with COVID in India right now. I think it's going to be 12 to 24 months before we start to see the coffee supply chain really affected. Beyond, I don't know how long this crisis is going to go on for them for COVID, but it'll be really interesting to track that they've got quite a substantial amount of commodity coffee. And I know some people are moving into specialty, but to see the way that Indian commodity coffee is going to be affected from a supply chain perspective based on the huge outbreak that they've got happening right now is going to be very interesting to track moving into next year. So we'll see what happens with that. When you guys talk about roasting for your customers, I've always wondered this. Who's your customer as the roaster? Is your customer the barista, or is your customer the coffee drinker?
Oh, I would 100% say the coffee drinker for me. And it's my job as a roaster to really communicate clearly with the barista and play a role in helping them understand the expectation, helping them understand why it's been roasted a certain way. And even to an extent in terms of the education, in terms of like coffee selection, and why they would see, like for me, for example, I'm working with a company where we're definitely not big. We're kind of tiny. We're only roasting for a couple of places. And so we're not in the fortunate position where we can future contract, some volume. So we've got one component that's a relationship coffee, due to my relationship with the producer. So we've got the ability to lock that coffee in, but the other components will, shift a little bit more seasonally. And so it's helping the baristas understand that, the beans, some of the origins have changed. Roast level, definitely not, but they may see a slight shift in their extractions based on either, differences in density and things that may pop through if it's a blend in particular. But really, I think it's really important helping baristas understand the expectation of the end flavor. So they also understand the suggested brew parameters or brew ratios, even down to the style of basket. I mean, I've definitely had to work with some places lately where we've had to change, the baskets, because that was significantly impacting the way the coffee was extracting on the espresso machine in particular. But then the single origins will always be more fluid in the sense of they know that changes. They know how to deal with that dialing in process where it will shift and change based on the origin and all that kind of stuff. So but then, like, once they're clear on those parameters, they also then understand, because they've got to think about cup sizes, they've got to think about in-house versus takeaway, and then that final end result, to the customer. And like here in Australia, it's still 95% milk-based, coffees going out, and so it's that whole helping them understand the extraction's been designed for the cup size, the cut through, the final flavor, as well as, of course, whether it's expressing some origin character and all that kind of stuff. And so that would be, I would say it would always be for me considering that for the final customer and helping them have that great experience, with the coffee, that whole flow through.
How about you, Ante?
The same, but most of our coffee is going to end up in a machine that we control, so it's let's say easier for us. But what you just mentioned, it just says that that roasting is not that important in a whole chain. Whole it's just a minor part of the
you just said
big
something
wheel.
so controversial,
That's
because
huge.
all roasters believe like they are
know,
the most important person in the supply chain, just like
you said-
baristas think they're the most important person.
But I do, but if we maybe we haven't been accountable enough, because if we stuff up a roast and let it sneak through, I have seen a lot of technique that baristas have had to employ to make up for a really crap roast. And that's where I see a lot of technique evolving with baristas, like up dosing, grinding too fine, or these bloody long shots, or whatever they're doing to get something out of the coffee, because we've stuffed up, because we've underdeveloped it so much that, or they use, something that's happened. Anyway, I digress. Sorry, Ante.
But it also comes down to if you think about the roasting, the higher the quality of the green beans, the less skillful you have to be in a way. It's less things for you to do. It does
give you a bit of leeway, for sure.
And that's if you want to learn roasting, start with something that's just entry level or specialty.
What did you start with?
I've contacted, I think it's called Mare Terra, the Spanish green importer, and I've sent a mail. I've just got a roaster. I need something that's cheap, and what do you have?
And easy.
Yeah, and then they recommended some. They had some Guatemalan coffees. I think it was a kind of.
Wow.
The new harvest was just starting in Guatemala, and they have from a previous one, and they gave me a good price, and I bought a bag, and then 20 something 3 kilo roast.
Burnt your way through it.
Burnt your way through it. Do you guys find, and I'm cheating here because I think I might know the answer to this, do either of you have an origin? No, wait. Do both of you have an origin that you find a little bit more challenging to approach?
Oh God. You know what I'm going to say?
I think I do. Is it the same? I don't know if it's the same for both of you. And for you, it's a Peru, right?
Oh, it's my nemesis coffee. For whatever reason, it never behaves, no matter what I do. Kenya's probably not far behind it, but like, I think because Kenya's have that, such amazing origin flavors anyway.
So
you're going to get, as long as it doesn't taste like, ketchup or, savory, that tomato sauce, kind of flavor.
I don't mind that. I don't mind it, just because you really know that you're drinking a Kenyan.
Yeah, true. But for some reason, Peru, they just get me every time.
Yeah, wow. How about you, Ante?
I don't have Peru is challenging, but just because of the volume that we do here, I'm able to control it well.
Yep.
Once I have I don't know how many roasts I did of Peru, but then it gets easier with the time. But
especially when you've got an IMF, like it'll just drive it through. Yeah.
That's also a thing. This roaster is really powerful, and it's easy to control in that fully aromatic cycle, so it makes life easier. But I find the dark roast harder to do than the light roast. If you want to do it good.
Yes. What in particular challenges you about that?
It's easy to get them flat tasting and empty with no sweetness, lacking body, because you are taking away of all of those, let's say, desirable things. If you look at a specialty coffee flavor wheel, and then when you get into this very tiny flavor window of all of those roasty notes, and you lose a body, you lose sweetness, or it flicks, crashes, whatever it does weird, there's nothing in that cup.
Do you think it's because one thing I find with dark roasting that challenges me, and this is something that in the industry as well, and maybe you agree or disagree, is the whole, where does body and sweetness happen in a roast? And I hate that it's out there, that it's the end of the roast, that's about body and sweetness. Whereas I know I've tasted enough profiles to really understand it really is from the middle, from the Maillard midsection, where your sugar browning's happening, your caramelizing starting, and every time the midsection gets too short, I always have that empty, hollow, low body, low sweetness, you know, flavor. So I think for me, that's challenging with a dark roast is because I have to head into first crack so much hotter, it does impact my time in the midsection of the profile. And so learning to find what I'm okay with, so I've got enough energy and rate of rise to make it, you know, to my dark endpoint. I do find that challenging, of course, yeah, with a dark roast, and whether it is that impact on the rate at which things are happening in that midsection, that then contributes to that, you know, kind of lower body or kind of flat sensation, and just naturally the way that, you know, the energy will kick up at the end as it's heading into second. Because I find if I pull a dark roast down to perfect, I find it also makes it too clean, if that makes sense. I don't know. Yeah, that's what I just find.
But yeah, what I think is important when you do those dark roasts is that you have to keep it short enough, and that means using sufficient energy, because
Yes.
you can lose that sweetness and body if you, I call it under roasting, when you just go low on energy and then it takes way too long to roast it. There's no
Yes.
sweetness. It's
Yes.
completely empty. Even those
Yes.
roasty flavors are kind of a toned down. So I think that's the worst cup in terms
Yep.
of
Yep. And I think that's where it does challenge the, you know, dare I say the, you know, the term old school again. When I first started roasting, I was taught it had to be really long and slow. And I started doing really full on traditional Italian style, you know, dark second crack, rolling second crack, you know, really quite dark and oily, but the coffee always had, you know, this astringency and sourness to it. And I wish, you know, I knew what I know now, and I could have applied that in the sense of really analyzing where things were happening, because we were never told to look at the coffee. We were only told to listen out for first crack, but first crack wasn't the main event. It was just, you know, another, you know, point. It was then getting ready for what level of second crack was about to happen, kind of thing. And so there wasn't much knowledge about beforehand, like how did we get there? It was just a time, a temperature, and what level of second crack it was, and that was it basically. So, and I have to admit, probably some of the best dark roasts I've had have definitely fallen into that slightly quicker time category, in terms of definitely not long and drawn out. Yeah, really using good power and energy to get through. Yeah.
I mean, timing wise, our dark roast look like 5.5 minutes. Then you have 4 minutes that middle phase, and then you have like 3.5 minutes maybe development time.
Yep.
And we try to have a constantly declining ROR in all of our dark roasts. I think that helps with the structure of it a lot.
Actually, that actually sounds like, I just thought to myself, oh, that's actually my milk profile, which is pretty normal. So I guess because I'm not nowhere near second crack on that, but definitely if I was to go another minute, like another 30 seconds to a minute, I would definitely be heading into that if I could make it, because I would probably have, I really love 5.5 minute yellow. I would probably have a 3.5 minute midsection on my darker roast. So I had enough energy to then be able to make it to my second crack kind of point if I was going. And I would probably take probably 4 minutes actually on that back end. And I might just have a really gentle rise on the rate of rise, like not like a flick, if that makes sense. Like just a really gradual little bump at the end.
Like a scatter ramp.
So we have a
but not steep. Yep. Or like a Nike tick kind of thing.
Okay.
Yep.
We have one that goes flat towards the end, and it's called city roast. It's very classical. It's almost like slightly less roasty, but more rounded, flatter coffee.
Yeah. Wow.
Kind of, which is from I think the legacy from when company was started. It's still the same name, same idea behind the blend. And that's the tricky part. So I was employed by the company that's been in the industry for 20 years already, well-established blends.
Right.
You need to follow a specific idea of the blend.
Yep.
And now you have to teach yourself to cap for those things and to deliver them and maybe even improve them.
Yep.
And then
Go ahead.
it's a different game.
Yes.
So I don't think I have a style. I just have a, let's say, understanding of my equipment.
But
And then
yeah,
I'm
exactly. You're being true to the product. You're understanding the product
that's the thing. I understand the
and the
product.
brand.
I can find the flaws on a cupping table, and then I can fix them later.
Yep.
And it goes
Yep.
back to that whole thing of you having to detach from what you like,
Yeah.
get it out of the way, be a professional. These are the targets I'm trying to hit with my flavor profiles. These are the targets I'm trying to hit with my tasting profiles. And if I understand where I'm going, I'm going to know how to get there.
As if you look, what I do is I have like 4 or 5 different blends, 3, 4 singles. There's no way I can like all of them. If I like all of them, then something is not right with me, right? I mean, it's very
Well, if
different
they're all
approaches,
so
very
different,
ideas.
if
Very
you're
different.
right, that's if you're roasting them all to a similar profile, then I could understand if you like them all. But if you're roasting light and medium and dark and everything in between, now I would be kind of concerned if you liked everything.
But that's
well, if you did get a chance to, I was going to say go rogue, but that's probably not the right word. But like what is the Ante roast? What is your steez?
What do you like?
What's the Ante steez? Like what would you do if you had the chance?
I think I change it seasonally. These last days,
like
I really.
what makes you
So
just want to just go, my roast is blah.
I don't have it actually. The reason being is, so what I drink at home, I never drink when I go out. So when I go out, I go for experience. I'm not going for the same coffee I'm having at home.
Okay. Yep.
I want to taste something else. I want to taste
Understood.
other people roast. I want to taste different origins, different ideas.
Yep.
I think coffee is exciting.
Do you feel, in terms of conversations with your peers, do you feel you could have that conversation with someone you really love their coffee, and how would you ask them? Would you feel comfortable saying, hey, can you give me an idea about your roasting approach? Do you feel that they would be open about that, in terms of, even if they said to you 5-minute yellow, 3-minute midsection, 1 minute on the end kind of thing? Or do you think they think like that when they think about their roasting?
Some of them, yes. I mean, it's a people here in Denmark are quite open to conversation about different other roasters.
Well, that's
You're
good.
an open-minded people.
So it's always nice to chat. Even if we share that information, it's not like you can really use it. It can give you some idea how it should taste or behave, but it's not like something you can take and then use in your own roaster and then it's gonna do wonders for you or whatever. Yes, it doesn't work that way. So but yeah, that's why I like cupping.
Do you taste those experienced coffees when you're out, and do you try and kind of like think about maybe like what did they do to create that?
Yeah, but it's also, it comes down to a brewing technique, because brewing is also a big variable. So
yeah, true.
It's hard to teach yourself to kind of be able to taste what's from roasting, what's from a brewing, and then some of those things, they can kind of overlap.
So I guess on that point, for the roasters, listening out there, because I actually had this on the weekend with somebody in my roasting course, completely new to the industry, wanting to get into roasting, and they actually said to me they were quite adamant that they didn't want to know how to make coffee, and I kind of went, well, as a roaster, you kind of need to, because they were really adamant that they weren't all about barista skills and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of went, well, you actually do need to know that, because you are creating something to be tasted. And I think that that point that you just said about, well, yes, you can think about the profile, but you've also got to think about, the brewing technique. And I think, would you definitely say, with people wanting to be roasters or that are currently roasters, is really making sure they're honing in? Because I know I forget sometimes, about my past barista, life, and I know I get super excited when I jump on the machine again, and just always reminding myself, like, oh wow, like I just really connecting with the extraction process again and the brewing process, and really connecting with that, and really reminding roasters that you kind of do need to know how to brew coffee and make coffee if you want to be a roaster. Would you definitely?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And what's also important to note is I never judge a roast based on a single cup, either on a cupping table or a single espresso or a single filter coffee, because things can go wrong and they can taste very different. So I think it's important to do it multiple times before you come to some conclusion, or let's say this is whatever it is.
Yep.
And I think
So
it's
you
whenever you're
go.
doing when do things cup here things in a roaster, it's always blind. And the
Yes.
cupping table proved me wrong so many times that I'm always like,
So
let me have
humbling,
another
right?
taste. Let's make
So
another cup, and then we're gonna make the decision.
Yeah, wow. And then you look at the profile and kind of go, huh, okay, very good. Carry on.
I have to ask,
Yeah,
Ante,
awesome.
are you naturally this open-minded in the rest of your life or just in roasting?
I'm not really the person to ask that, am I? I would like
we
to
know
think
if
that I am,
we
but,
approach life as open-minded people, right? Like, are you
but
an open-minded person?
I think me moving from Croatia opened my mind a
Word.
lot. It's not because of the Croatia, it's just when you change environment,
when you do hard things and
yeah.
you get in outside of your comfort zone, you are forced to have to think about things more open-mindedly, right?
Yep.
Yeah, wow. Before we wrap up, I want to talk about the idea of ambassadorship. And this is something I wanted to talk to both of you about, not just to you as a roasting champion of Denmark, Ante, but ambassadorship is something that I see in a lot of like barista comps, you know, depending on who wins the World Barista competition, some of them are great ambassadors for their profession and others do nothing with it. I don't know how it works with roasters. And certainly from the people that I've spoken to who are roasters, if I ask them like, who is the roasting champion currently? And they're usually able to name that. When I say to them, what did you learn about roasting or being a roaster from that person? Usually I get a blank face. And I think we could, as an industry, start to incorporate ambassadorship into these kind of titles that we give people so that it is more meaningful, so that, you know, the kind of people who win these accolades can impart some inspiration. Not that you should be burdened with that, but I think it's a lovely gesture of a way of giving back or influencing a generation or, you know, throughout things. If the people who do win those kinds of accolades are able to impart some of the things, the value of what's got them there to the community, what do you guys think?
I was going to quickly say, I've been involved before COVID, at least for the last maybe 3 years. So when I did my origin trips to Brazil, Capricornio Coffee were quite active as being sponsors, and they would bring over, I think it was either the top 10 finalists from the world, you know, roasting champs, and they would bring them to Brazil when we had our training week in Brazil. So I would be doing my classes, and then the roasting, you know, champs would come in, and then they would be doing, you know, training workshops where we had there was always like producers, agronomists, researchers, you know, roasters in general involved in that. So I saw it from that aspect, you know, in Brazil, because I'm so closely involved with Capricornio Coffee. But I haven't seen it in any other
so you
kind
know
of
what
like
I'm talking
format.
about, right?
So
Like,
so maybe Ante, have you seen anything, you know, beyond, you know, the competition as far as like getting the champs together to do some
if you talk about roasting, not really, but that I also mentioned earlier that now I'm preparing myself to roast for a cupping table, and it's hard to be an ambassador or to preach about something when you change your approach for a specific competition. I don't think that necessarily that cupping sheet resembles what we do in a production roasting.
Help me understand that more, guys.
So how I'm gonna roast for a world championship, I would never do that in a production roasting.
Okay. So
And
it's not
that-
reflective of your workplace or what you're doing for your customers.
So let's say I'm gonna go compete in a roasting, and I'm gonna roast that way only for a roasting championship.
Right.
So it's like championship is the only purpose of it.
Because
Nothing
it's also based on scoring as well. And I don't know about you, but I'm really against scoring production roasting, because production roasting is about levels of intensity. Like, we're roasting for a purpose, where we're influencing specific, elements of acidity, body, sweetness, flavor, aftertaste, all of that with our roasting approach, because there's an end product that has to be, created and satisfied. So yeah, it's a very, to me, it's a very different kind of mindset there.
when we talk about green coffee samples, it's a different talk than when we talk about production roast.
Yes.
It's just on a coffee samples, you're focusing on flavors, acidity, stuff like that, aroma.
But to a point, you also do potentially want to grade as well. Yeah, you do want to, have some grading and scoring to confirm it's where it should be, and you're getting what you paid for, basically, and then which product line then, where it's going to go.
And then for a championship, you have a balance and sweetness that brings like double points. And that means if you can basically sacrifice on other parts to emphasize this and get more points. But then again, it's not something you would do in production roasting.
I think that's the important thing. Is I was thinking about this because I got approached by a couple of roasters about training for the competitions, and they've just, sadly, we need to kind of realize that the aspect of the competition is it's a points game, and very rarely do we win the competition on the flavor, on the cupping. I think you pointed that out too, Ante, in terms of it's all the other tasks that can let you down. It's the easy points that drag you down. You're going to roast your heart out and produce the most amazing roast for that coffee, and it could still taste gangbusters on the cupping table, but it might not be enough points to get you over the line to win, because you made a mistake with your sample roasting. You didn't get your color measurements right. You put the wrong number down on your green grading, and the green grading's not in line with normal green grading as well. So that there's a difference in the thought process, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's really interesting. It's really interesting.
You're basically roasting for a score sheet, and that's it.
Correct. Yeah.
What I'm hearing is when you're at work, you're roasting to what the business needs fulfilled. And when you're in competition, you're roasting for a cupping table. At what point are you guys roasting coffee that you want to drink?
Oh, I actually did that the other day. I actually did 2 roasts.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I was playing around.
When?
Yeah, every now and then we do a weird roast that we do keep for ourselves here in the roastery for a machine, but yeah. And those are usually like also the things that you would not normally do either for a competition or for a production roast.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
Completely like different approaches, like long soaks.
Well,
whatever.
it's not like you can buy enough to roast like green in small enough quantities where you can just roast a few batches and then you're done. Like it's too big to just buy a bag to roast for yourself, and you're not going to drink 60 kilos worth of coffee a year of the same coffee for home a year. It's just not going to happen. It's not worth it. I've often wondered, like, if you don't own the roasting company, at what point are you roasting coffee as the roaster to what you like?
I mean, for me, it would be if it's something that I bought myself.
Right.
I guess I'm in a lucky position too, because I've got green that I have for the roasting course. So, I've got the opportunity to roast some of that. Yeah,
nice.
The same thing. I would much rather be able to choose the green than the roast.
Right. Okay.
I think the roasting is less important than the green beans. So yeah.
Well, guys, this has been a great conversation. I don't know how an hour and a half just went past like that.
I know.
That has been so quick. When is the comp? How far away is it?
It should be in November in Taiwan if they don't postpone it. Or
wow. Yep.
Okay. Well, the best of luck with that. And no matter what happens, I hope you come back on the podcast so we can talk about what it was like whenever it does happen. It'd be,
Yeah, or
I
even,
think it'd be
just
really
how your
great.
preparations are going,
Yeah.
you know, either beforehand or yeah, or maybe in the meantime something might shift and change in the format. I was actually thinking the other day, it'd be kind of cool if they did have to do it off
Remote?
site. Yeah, because I think I've seen some interesting, you know, concepts. I was thinking, you know, how would you feel, for example, if there was still a central panel of judges, you know, proper accredited judges involved, you give them your profile and your color measurements. And as long as that's matched, then that's your approach, basically. So if that's able to be replicated as, you know, a representation of your roasting, and then you can do all the other stuff. They can send you the samples to grade and to, you know, do all that other stuff, you know, yourself. But as far as the actual roasting side of things, if they can replicate your profile,
Well,
it
I could in
could
theory,
work.
I could in theory also control a Gießen through my laptop over here through the Cropster.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
that would be
Remote
better approach,
control.
yeah.
To any potential judges that are listening or potential
We've just
organizers.
redesigned the whole competition. We're doing it remotely through Cropstar, through the remote control. I love it.
Okay, and you've got to get onto that.
It could possibly happen. How wicked would that be? Oh my God.
But
you heard it here first.
How do they finish it though? You'd have to yell at them through the screen to drop
probably,
it. And you wouldn't want them to muck up the loading routine as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. There is always someone to blame. It's not my fault. It's the guy.
Yeah,
that
true.
Loading
Hey,
the
look, you never know. Who knows?
Surely
it could
we
be
can
a
call
remote.
someone to propose this. So, well, just, I mean, what are they going to do with all these backed up national champions? Like we've got national
dunno.
champions for brewers for 2019 and 2020 and 2021. What are they going to do when and barista and roasters and all this stuff? Like, what happens now with all these national world championships?
It's hard to say, but if you're organizing a competition, you can do it like 2 weekends and then have one for 2020 and one for 2021.
I just got all the answers, don't you, bro?
Yeah.
I thought about it a lot, so it's
I can
you
tell.
already have a setup and everything, so you can just do it in that way. But who knows?
By the time we get to it, they're going to have 10 weekends.
Yeah, I know.
I just don't know. I think that they'd be better off coming up with an interim solution so that we can get it moving and then just see and then perhaps allow world champions to become a world champion a second time in the normal format if they want to do that. I don't know. It'll be really interesting to see the way it goes.
It will be. Yep.
We live in a different, like, times are changing so quickly. It's going to be interesting to see how we keep up with what's coming. And then the next catastrophe shows up and we're in a new world again.
Goodness.
There's an asteroid coming at some point, I'm sure of it.
Oh, goodness.
But the coffee will be good, so that's all that matters. Ante Bikic. Yes. I said it right twice now. I'm so proud of myself. And Cooper, this has been a delightful conversation. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Peace, love, and peanut butter, everyone. Have an amazing rest of your day.